Do you miss the days of waking up on Saturday morning, lying around in your PJs, and tuning in to the latest episode of your favorite shows? Well, so do we. Welcome to the SatAM Club, where we take a look at the Saturday mornings of days past. Welcome to the SatAM Club.
Hello, everyone, and happy Saturday morning. I'm here with some friends, and we just watched some delightful Saturday morning content. It's the SatAM Club here in KFM, and today I am joined by the one and only Nova Rose. Hello! And we are also joined once again by Gajinka.
Hello!
And today is, I guess, a little bit of a special episode. It's one I've had on the list for us to do since we started this series. The tagline for this episode is Forward's Early Childhood Episode. We went back to 1988 to watch two cartoons that I watched as a child. So, but before we dive into that, let's talk about what happened in 1988.
He doesn't want to drink.
He does.
I don't.
You do.
I don't.
You do.
I don't.
You do.
I don't.
You don't.
I do.
He joins us from Atlanta to discuss the charges, and we welcome you, James Brown. How did all of this trouble begin?
Living in America.
Shake your love. I just can't shake your love. Shake your love.
Think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Once again, a turf dispute between the Guardian Angels and the New York City Police Department has overshadowed the real battle going on in the streets here. And that's between the crack dealers and the people who have to live and work here.
Carnage tonight in the Scotland village of Lockerbie, where a Pan Am 747 headed for New York crashed and exploded.
For this episode, I want to establish here, I would have been either 4 or 5 when the cartoons aired that we watched today. So, like I said, both of these were ones that I remember watching as a child, and we're going to start with the first one we watched today, which was Garfield and Friends. A classic from the late 80s, early 90s. I believe it went about 7 seasons or so. Full disclosure, I own the entire series on DVD of Garfield and Friends.
What?
Also, there is a dedicated channel on Pluto TV that plays nothing but Garfield and Friends. So,
I've seen it. It's this big.
But I come to this with a lot of the shows that we've watched so far in this series, I either don't remember or haven't or never saw. This is one that I still will watch this show to this day. So just know that going in.
It was a show that I even grew up with. When I was in elementary school, there was like a before school care program that they held, kind of like after school care, but it was before. And they would always put on Garfield and Friends.
So let's talk about the episode we watched today, shall we? So Garfield and Friends is a show that was a half-hour show told in 3 segments. There was like 3 individual cartoons with a couple of little shorts mixed in. It actually gives me kind of memories of Richie Rich when we watched that a few weeks ago. That had several small cartoons packed into a tight little package there. So Garfield and Friends was like that, where they would have 2, it was like a sandwich. You had 2 Garfield cartoons, but in the middle you had U.S. Acres, which was a separate cartoon with a group of farm animals who were all basically working on this farm and their misadventure. We'll start here with the first one. Now, the big thing about the Garfield cartoons in this specific episode we watched, it started out, I believe the first one's called Boxo Fun. But in both the first Garfield segment and the second one, I would argue this episode in particular gets into the reality of Garfield's just a cat.
Well, nothing to do today but hang on the old screen door. I'm bored.
He's a cat doing cat things. And what's one of the things that cats love to do? Get in boxes. What did you say?
If they fits, they sits.
I said anarchy.
Anarchy. Well, that too. But, so in this, we have Garfield getting in an empty box from John. Now, also, I want to back up a minute. Now, I know that it's a cartoon and it's the 80s. A couple things stuck out to me. One was John unpacks all of these books out of this box, and he unpacks like 10 to 15 books for like...
It was a lot of books.
One course on a language.
Yeah.
Hey, you're in college. How many books did you have to buy this semester?
To be fair, though, my one class, I already they used the same book.
Okay,
class,
so theoretically one then.
It's theoretically one, although it's kind of a twofer. So it's like it'll work for one class and then the next class after it.
Okay, but my point is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's really interesting because, like, even thinking about when I was in school, I've only taken college credit classes. I've never gone to college officially, XYZ thing. But the most books that I ever had was in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And even then it was like your history book, your science book, math book, language arts,
social studies.
That went with history. So I maybe had like 5 or 6 books. Now, mind you, they weren't tiny books. They were pretty chunky. But it's interesting that he's learning this one language and there's like 10, 15 books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just for one semester course.
Yeah.
This isn't, him taking all of them at once kind of situation.
So, now, granted, he takes the books, he steps aside, and really, I'd say one of the big themes of all of this episode we watched, all parts of it, is the concept of imagination and fantasizing. Because Garfield proceeds to do a lot of fantasizing about various adventures he's in just in the box.
And now, Enzio pulls ahead of the pack, deftly weaving his way into the lead. The crowd is going wild. I said the crowd is going wild.
Which is, like, I love that. Let's face it, that's such a thing you did as a kid, right? Is you'd take, like, mundane objects and you'd be like, this is my helmet, or this is, my sword, and it's just a stick.
Yeah. No,
Things
I
like
remember my grandmother getting her gateway computer. The box was a cat.
Like the cow pattern? Yeah, I remember that.
It was a cow pattern and everything. And we had this big giant box because they weren't, flat screens and everything. It was a giant box. And I was able to fit me in it. I think at one point my mom got in the box by herself, which was saying a lot. I fit in that box, and so did many of my toys, and I had a blast in that box. I am telling you, oh my god.
Let them among us who has not fit themselves into a box, right?
I'm just thinking of that entire episode of SpongeBob with the box.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking the entire time. Imagination. But yeah, totally. That first episode, reminded me of the SpongeBob Imagination episode.
Yeah, the thing for me, where it took me at one point, there's a scene where he pretends like he is a fighter pilot.
Uh-oh, looks like I've got company.
And all I could think of is Snoopy as World War I flying ace.
You said that, and I instantly thought of Top Gun.
I mean, I think both are fair, especially because Top Gun was very big in the 80s.
Oh, it was huge.
It was
and
huge. I mean, even the I want to say the sequel that came out not that long ago, like a year or two ago, I think did pretty
Maverick.
well, and I heard it was good.
I think I saw it in the theater twice.
That's saying
I liked
something.
it that much. Yeah.
I love too. One of the notes I have on that episode is I love at the end when John kicks out Garfield and Odie to be outside so he can have some peace and quiet, and then he takes the box and put it on his head and starts role-playing and imagining by himself too, just like what Garfield was doing.
You did not expect Sir John of Camelot? Ha-ha! Take this, you blackguard, and that, and this, for the honor of Queen Beatrice and King Arthur. The round table is actually an ellipse.
I love that. I thought it sent like a message of like everyone can do this, and it's okay and it's cool. I think that's a big thing about, like nurturing imagination is and creativity is such a huge important thing for children. And let's be real. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I feel like, especially in my childhood, there was a lot of forces pulling me where I wanted to be more creative and imaginative and free thinking, but I felt like there were so many forces trying to push on me to conform and be more stalwart instead of being more fun and silly. And it's like one of those things about like, okay, like it always bothered me in my head because let's face it, the people who are making the great inventions, who are making the great art, are the people who are allowing themselves to let that creativity flow, to come up with the new ideas. So it's almost one of those things that, and I don't want to go too far, but let's face it, I am a sociologist. This is what I do. It's like that matter of like societal control, that pressure that gets put on you from a kid to conform, to keep you in line, but it almost can simultaneously subdue your potential greatness almost, I could say.
No, I can totally agree with that. There was so much of like so I've also recently done some like self-discovering and stuff. I remember being told as a kid a lot that I was very mature for my age. And what they meant by that was that like I didn't go and play like the other kids my age. I was more, for lack of better wording, lacking imagination in my teens, or even my early like preteens. So like I had to grow up early.
Yeah.
Grow up early, and just seeing that, it really kind of enforced in my mind, if I was a kid, that just because you grow up doesn't mean that you can't do fun things still.
Mm-hmm. And
well,
go ahead.
one thing that I guess I've been noticing increasingly recently is I feel like, especially in the 90s, 80s, and onward, it was like, I feel like once you hit a certain age, probably around like 10ish, you're almost like not allowed to have imagination anymore. You have to conform. You have to conform to our factory system.
Well, forget your imaginary friends.
I'll tell you this too. How do I put this? Like, let me adjust. When I was a kid, I didn't really have a lot of friends to play with, and those that I tried to, a lot of them turned out to be not real friends. And I never had, even with what I did have, I never had friends that I really shared a lot of these interests with until later in life. Like, I didn't have friends to watch Garfield and Friends with as a kid. And I think that's part of the thing when I thought of the concept for SatAM Club that got me so excited to do this series, is the fact that I was never able to do this as a kid. I was never able to wake up and be in my PJs and call a friend and we'd watch Saturday morning cartoons. That wasn't a thing for me as a kid. So I've always felt like I missed out on a lot of that stuff. And now I'm making up for it now. And I don't think, like, let's face it, I feel like there's a lot of examples in our history, especially when we talk about certain celebrities who end up getting their childhoods ruined, type of thing. That's like a trope of, X-celebrity was a childhood celebrity and it ruined them, and now as an adult, I mean, like, let's look at what Michael Jackson did. He built a whole flippin' ranch so he could live like a kid because he got pushed so hard when he was a child. For me, I didn't have people to share a lot of this stuff with. I was even actively I was reading some Marvel comics as a kid and wanting to talk, and I would try to talk to other kids about it, and I'd basically get told, like, we don't give a shit, shut up. Power Rangers, I watched Power Rangers as a kid and had to hide it because it was not uncool at my school. So I never got to share this stuff, and I feel like that had a definite effect on me as a childhood. Of when there were those things that I was interested, that were more of that creative route, when I was interested so much in music or broadcasting or all this stuff that is in more like fields where I'd be banking on my personality and my creativity, I always felt like I could never do it because of I think that's part of it, is everything around me kind of set my mental state to be, this isn't for you. You're not good enough for this. Everybody else is telling you, like, you can't even make a friend because you like this.
Yeah, no, I get that as well. I mean, I was in elementary school and Powerpuff Girls came out. I actually was one of the kids who voted for Powerpuff Girls to get a series. And it was me and one other girl that were into Powerpuff Girls. Everybody else in the school was like, oh, Powerpuff Girls is for kids. And I'm like, we are kids.
Like, it's like, that's a thing of, there's that trope about, like, when you're a kid, all you want to do is grow up. And when you are an adult, all you want to do is go back to being a kid. When I always wanted to go back to being a kid. Like, when I was 18, I wanted to go back to being 16.
One thing that I've kind of noticed is when I was a kid, I don't know if it's that I didn't care as much, cause like I just liked what I liked, and I don't recall having many issues, I guess. Like, I was really into like Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and like I would play with the kids, like, at the cafeteria table.
And that could be a difference in when and where you grew up versus me, too. Because, you grew up in a different state, in a different decade, so it's like, and Pokemon didn't exist, Yu-Gi-Oh didn't exist for me when I was growing up. We had no card games. Like, I don't even remember when Magic started up, but, like, when I was growing up,
Early
we
90s.
were only starting to get into D&D even. So that's the type of atmosphere I had where it's like nerd culture was so looked down on when I was a kid. And so I don't, like, it's different because my closest connection would be to your kiddo as far as what's cool and hip or whatever for the kids nowadays. Wow, I just aged myself by saying those words. But you understand what I mean of, like,
yeah.
But I still get the vibe that a lot of things that when I was 5 would have been considered nerdy are cool now. Like, you know, like, cause, like, your kiddo's really into things like Five Nights at Freddy's, Pokemon, all this stuff, where when I was a kid, that was, like, shunned. But now it's like, everyone does it. So it's like, you can tell that shift. And it's great because it's a more inclusive shift that arguably should help to promote this sense of creativity.
Absolutely.
I recently watched the new Mean Girls that's out, and one thing that I kind of noticed is when I was in school, like, they're really they still existed, but they weren't as prominent. I think from the 80s and 90s, is cliques. Like, cliques kind of don't exist anymore. Like, I feel
That's
like,
amazing if true.
That
it's
is,
because, for instance, when I was in high school, it was like I was on the chess team, which, you know, if this was the 80s and 90s, they would be like the dorks with like the crazy glasses and like the whatever, but
headgear and yeah.
But in
Oh
my
my
in
gosh.
my in my high school, it was like on the chess team with me, who was just a normal person. Like, I had jocks on the team. Like,
Yeah.
they somehow did that, did great, would be considered nerds back in the day, were like, they did chess team, but then they were like football players and soccer players, and it's like, when did this overlap start to happen?
I also think, like, there's always been exceptions to the rule, for one thing.
I have one more thing to go say that I also thought was interesting. Talking to my kiddo, one of the most popular girls is an emo chick.
Huh.
Which is like, when the fuck did this happen?
I do want to point out two quick things. One, we are speaking just on personal experience with this. We don't have any data, so I'm sure there is still, you know, clickiness that's happening out there. It's just a matter of, but it does seem as an overall trend, like it's starting to get away from that. Like, because when I was a kid, or like especially when I was in high school, I remember just walking into the cafeteria the first day of school type of thing, and trying to figure out where to sit, and realizing everybody sits in their cliques. Like, you had jocks that sat together, and you had all this stuff, and like, I didn't fit with any clique. Like, the people that I ended up hanging out with in high school, we kind of, like, it was a weird happenstance. We all basically just ended up sitting at the same table because we had nowhere else to sit. So we just started hanging out with each other and became friends. It was like, so we were the clique without a clique, if that makes sense. But it was very cliquey still.
I had an interesting high school experience because middle school, halfway into middle school, I realized that I was goth.
Same.
And went into homeschooling because of some bad bullying issues because I was goth. Like, quite literally, that's why I dropped out of middle school and to go into homeschool, was because of bullying because I was goth. And was forced back into public school. Went into high school, there were no goth kids. The closest thing to goth were scene kids. And they were the chillest people, I'm telling you. They were so cool.
It is interesting, because, like, I don't even think scene kids was a term for me growing up.
I've never heard it.
Yeah.
For me,
No, I've heard it, but I don't think it was really a thing for me.
It was like you were either goth or emo.
Yeah,
and emo
pretty
wasn't
much.
a thing either. Like, emo wasn't a term.
Emo was like, as far as like
emo
scene
really,
kids,
it was odds.
I think I could actually explain what's happening, and that's the internet.
It's a good point.
The internet makes it so that we have access to so many more types of people, whereas before, at least when you're a kid, the only way, or like the only people that you experience are the people that are in your, you know, high school, middle school, what have you. But now it's like, you know, a 15-year-old can go interact with a 40-something-year-old's, like, through this, that, or the other.
somebody can
I
interact
think
with somebody across the world and have similar.
Well, I think where you were going with it is, like, almost even going back to my example of when I felt like I could not share my love of Power Rangers and actually ended up stopping watching it because of that. If I had the internet back in the day, I could have found like a group page for like worldwide Power Rangers fans. Actually, you know what the best example of this actually is, and it applies to all of us? The Brony fandom.
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of us, like, I know for me, when I figured out, like, oh my god, I love this show, and I'm a Brony, and then it was like, the first thought was like, oh shit, am I the only one around here? But then I went online, and I found people, and I realized I had a community and didn't have to feel as weird. So that's a big thing. I think that's a really good point you have to make.
So back onto the episode, something that I kind of also got from when Dave put the box on John. Why did I say Dave? Anyways,
I don't know.
Anyways, when John put the box on his head, was that he was taking a break from learning. And I think that's an important thing to know and to mention, is that it's okay to take breaks from learning sometimes. You know, burnout exists.
Oh,
and,
yes, it does.
I'd go
you
insane.
know, yeah, exactly.
I watch you go insane.
Summer break exists for reasons. It's not just because the teachers need a break.
Well,
it's also to give the kids a break.
And even still, the ones that do year-round schooling, or one of the arguments for this altered one where it's not just a long summer break, but you take multiple breaks throughout the year, is just within that of everyone needs to get a break every now and then, or else you get overloaded. And that's a very good point.
But if you make the break too long, though, you crash.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's where little breaks come in, and that they're very beneficial.
And I'll say too, the other thing just going off of that is, and going into the second part of the Garfield episode, is the US Acres segment, which was centered around reading, which they do that a lot. The character of Orson on the US Acres segment is an avid reader, and his whole shtick is like he has a very active imagination, so he kind of imagines all the stuff from the books to life. And that was kind of a key element of this episode here.
I never let my imagination get carried away.
It is now 3 o'clock. I will be laughing until at least 5:30.
Because even still, like, basically, his overactive imagination kind of gets them in trouble, but it's spurned on by Roy, his whole character was the practical joker. But there's a point at the end of the episode where Lanolin says to him about, like, it's good to read. You should keep reading. You just have to remember sometimes things are real and sometimes things are pretend, but you still work with that. So, because I think that's a thing too that I'd argue we've discussed this on this show in different ways about parents having worries that their kids' overactive imaginations will cause them to lose touch with reality completely. Right?
Or that the work of fiction that they're reading or playing will impact their lives in a negative way.
Right. So,
like with video games.
You're gonna make it violent. You're gonna make it kill people.
So
right, exactly.
But this really touches that of, like, it's basically promoting reading and also saying, like, hey, we want you to do all this, but also remember, like, sometimes it's going to be really fun and cool, and sometimes it's just going to be very real, and just remember to keep that balance between everything. Now, as far as the cartoon goes here, one of the things I would about the US Acres is the characters are they have their personality set, and they are very unique, distinct, one from the next. And I think one of the big things is, like, no matter what adventures or misadventures they get into on it, at the end of the day, they all come together and are still running this farm. So, like, I think that's one of the big points about it. And we're still in a time when a lot of characters were very tropey. But yeah, I don't really hold it against them if the characters are tropey. I mean, it's easy to see it as an adult, but they very much stick to this. Roy's the practical joker. Bo is, like, that dude man. Lanolin is the very, like what?
She's my favorite.
Lanolin? She's very, like, she's kind of, like, aggressive, but she's very much about getting the work done and keeping everybody together. And then Wade. We have to talk about Wade. Wade, who is afraid of everything. Wade Duck, as somebody who, and I talked about this a little bit, but especially as a child, I suffered a lot, and I didn't realize it's what it was until I was an adult, but was agoraphobia, where you're, I mean, it's not necessarily this, but it almost is, like, you're afraid of everything. Like, anything you can't completely control, and even going out of your house, you're afraid to do it. And
Pantophobia, I think, is the correct afraid of everything.
But, I really had a lot of that. So Wade Duck, while I think some people look at him, and he is a little bit over the top, of course, for the sake of the cartoon and the characterization and all that. But as somebody who had periods in my life where I've been afraid of so much, I can get it at times where I know what it's like to something happens and you cannot bring yourself to do anything. And like, there's literal episodes where Wade's hidden himself in like a trash can or this, that, or the other thing, and I'm like, I feel that.
I honestly, I grew up loving two main characters from this particular series. Wade was one of them. Oh my god, the fact that there's a duck who's scared of everything to the point that he wears a swimming donut 24/7 that has his own face on it. And if you watch throughout the series, the face on the inner tube changes facial expressions to the series, to what's going on around him.
Yep.
And then my other favorite character was Shelly. I loved Shelly. He was cool.
Oh, Sheldon, yeah. Sheldon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, that he just never hatched, and he doesn't feel the need to hatch. And they didn't do much with him in this episode, but they've run jokes where, like, it's like he has this whole apartment inside of his egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I'm cooking something in the toaster oven, let me get it out. And it's like, wait, what?
It's bigger on the inside.
Yeah. The egg is like the tortoise. Or the TARDIS, the tortoise,
God.
What the hell?
The egg is the TARDIS. Oh my god. Is Sheldon confirmed a doctor now?
Maybe the next one.
Dun dun dun.
After the current sexy one.
Right?
Oh my god. It's so
Anyway, so that was most of what I had on the US Agri segment. It was fun. It was kitschy. The second Garfield segment here played a little bit more, I think, on some of those ideas too. So back on the aspect of Garfield just being a cat, it was this obedience school thing. And granted, you usually think of that more for dogs, and I feel like the training the idea of how to train animals has changed pretty radically in 40 years, 35 or whatever. But because if you talk to anybody who does quote-unquote obedience training, they'll tell you that the real person that they're training is the human.
Yeah.
But that wasn't this is still in the age where cartoons were still giving us visions of the pound and, and all this, like, vigorous obedience training on animals and stuff. And, granted, it was fun, but it was still, like, Garfield was just a cat again, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, they were going through the tricks.
All right! Roll over! Good. Now speak! Wake up!
Now I know where Nermal learned that trick.
And I was just like, this is what you teach a dog to do. Don't normally would teach a cat this, even today.
I also noticed that. Yeah. Okay. The obedience school, the initials for the name of the obedience school was SOS.
Yeah.
So that I was like, oh, I wonder if that was intentional.
Something else I noticed, the trainer.
Yes.
Reminded me of Principal Trunchbull from Matilda.
I could see that.
Like, even to the end where she's like running away and like, I don't want to see another one ever again.
Did you notice that? Because they build up her character that she was kicked out of the Marines, and at one point there's that shot where she's bent over, and you see the letters USMC actually on her outfit.
And Principal Trunchbull was a Marine who was kicked out.
It could be the inspiration.
Yeah.
It could be. There's episodes like that because Garfield gets in these situations where he ends up being like, I'll be the hero. you know?
Mhm.
Which I guess is what keeps him as an endearing character, because if all he did was sleep all day and whatever, it would be just that. But to keep it interesting, especially for a child audience, I think Garfield is a character. Now, I'm not Jim Davis, and trust me, a lot of people have made some interesting ass videos on the internet looking at Garfield. We're not going to talk about those today. Maybe another time. We do not have time to unpack Lasagna Cat today. I am sorry.
Aww.
However, I always felt like the core of Garfield is the weird stuff your cat does. Is the core of that character.
Yeah, I feel like Garfield was like the precursor to cat videos.
And then John Arbuckle just kind of always just became like the most. Like, I feel like as the series progressed, John Arbuckle became more and more the super down on his luck. And I hate to use the word pathetic, but I feel like that's what they're trying to make him seem, is pathetic. So overall, I don't know. Garfield and Friends, I still love it to this day. Not everything in it holds up as well. I will admit that there are some things, in the series overall, there are some moments and some things that get a little tropey or very much of the time, but I'm still able to enjoy it and laugh at it, and you know, overall, I think that there are some good elements. I think obviously Garfield continues to this day. We can argue to the cows come home about how effective it is nowadays versus the 80s, because things are definitely different. In the 80s, Garfield was everywhere. You know, people would steal other people's Garfields out of their cars and stuff in the 80s.
Yeah, like the window clings.
Yeah.
I saw a car on my campus with one of those.
Yeah.
I was like, those still exist?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have one that's a Porg.
Yeah, I have one that's poor, but I didn't know the Garfield ones that were stolen in the 80s were still around.
You can still get them. But yeah, Garfield, like, who would imagine that in a simple episode of Garfield we have so much to talk about, right?
Right.
But overall, like I said, I had fun with what we watched today. I think what we watched today in some ways is symptomatic of the time, but a lot of it holds up well, especially the first two segments. I think the obedience training doesn't hold up quite as well, just because that's not really a thing nowadays.
Yeah.
But the box of fun and the U.S. Acres segment about imagination and reading, like, that stuff still holds up to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Which is impressive. Yeah. And it's always impressive to me when we find shows on for this that's, you know, whatever random kids cartoon we find from 30, 20, whatever years ago we find, and if it still holds up to today, that I find incredibly impressive. So
yeah.
But why don't we talk about our second cartoon for the day? So we went for our second one, we watched something I haven't watched in a long time.
Same.
When I was a child, I got super into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Heroes in a half shell.
Turtle power.
You know, it's funny because I never watched these shows, like any TMNT, when I was growing up. And it's not because it wasn't around. My little cousin was obsessed with it. It was just like, I don't know, it was like outside of my radar.
My first debatable boyfriend when I was like 4, as weird as that may sound. Him and his parents were obsessed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, to the point that, like, whenever I would go over for a play date, like, we would watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the series. We would watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, the live actions, and the rubber suits.
that first Ninja Turtles movie. I mean, honestly, I watched all 3 of those live action ones.
They were so good.
Let's just for the audience at home, we're talking about the 90s live action, not the Michael Bay, whatever those were.
No, not the CGI stuff.
Right.
Like, I remember walking in at one point and his mom had run out of ordering things specifically for the house that were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle themed. She wanted new oven mitts. So she was crocheting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle oven mitts.
I have looked at Winnie the Pooh stuff for my kitchen, but I digress.
Yes. But, oh my gosh, this was, like, huge when I was a kid.
So, yeah, I had so many of the action figures that were such a big deal back in the late 80s.
How can a good rat avoid a bad cut-up?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
From Playmates.
Now, I haven't watched Ninja Turtles in years, so it was interesting to look back at this after, like, I probably haven't watched in 20 years. So, to see what I remembered and what still stood up and what was different. It doesn't hold up as well as I thought it would, unfortunately. But there was a lot of things that still were solid. I thought most of the voices were solid. Rob Paulsen, by the way, for those who don't know, is Raphael in it. Another voice that some might remember is James Avery, who played Shredder. If you don't recognize him by name, the late James Avery, I have to say, rest in peace, good sir. He also played Uncle Phil on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And that was the voice of Shredder. So, like, those couples stick out. I was cool with Leonardo and Donatello. I will say Michelangelo was so much more of the surfer bro dude than I even remembered.
Hey, whoa, chill out, dude. Come on, it's me. Michelangelo? For sure, dudes. Had you going there for a while, though, didn't I?
Like, I knew that was, like, a trope. I knew Michelangelo was the most of it, but he was even harder. It was, like, extreme mode, right?
It was extreme, dude, bro.
Now, granted, this was one of the early examples of that in animation from the time that set off the trend. So I guess in some ways I can forgive it a little bit because, like, it's weird to look back on it now because we go, what a stereotype. But when it's one of the first ones that begat the stereotype, it makes it a little different, right?
I don't even think I heard them say cowabunga.
I don't think so either. They did have plenty of pizza, though. There was.
They did have plenty of pizza.
Pizza appeared in the episode like at least 3 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And was actually kind of a fun joke at the end of it that was also supposed to be a teaching moment, which was fun. And Splinter, I was totally like Splinter was Splinter. He was so Splinter in this.
So you may have not had an issue with the voice setting and everything, but I like it seemed like so the direction was correct as far as what I could tell, but the voices themselves didn't seem to match up properly. Like, I personally thought Mikey would have been better. Whoever played Mikey would have been better playing Raphael, and whoever played Leo and Donatello, they should have switched too.
Donatello is meant to be the most serious out of all of them. And I think part of it is the episode that we got. I don't think there were a lot of situations where he got, because Donatello's like the machine guy, like the brain.
He's the nerd, and I love him.
Which
he is my
great.
favorite.
No, Donatello, I think, I remember, from my memory, Donatello, I think, was my favorite. Donatello and Leonardo would bounce back and forth, but I think it was normally Donatello. Mainly, I was a nerd kid too. But he didn't really, like, Donatello and Leonardo, I think, didn't... I honestly feel like Raph and Mikey were more pronounced in this episode.
So,
yeah.
Which one was the surfer bro?
Michelangelo.
Orange.
Is he normal?
The orange one.
Yeah, that's his personality.
That is
Michelangelo's personality. He is party boy, dude bro. But not dude bro like today's standards. Dude bro by 87, 88 standards.
I'm trying to think of a good way of putting it. Beast Boy.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting thing though, is it's like Beast Boy, like, he has the cadence for it, but that's not his personality.
Well,
and in the original Teen Titans, they played that really well.
This was one thing that was interesting here. It seemed like it was definitely the start of like a whole arc, it seemed, with these weird crystals. And granted, the lore of TMNT is a little crazy. Let's face it. Like, because you start off with the the ooze stuff, which is one thing, and and the connection to Shredder, and then you get Krang and all this Dimension X stuff, which is what was in there. And granted, Rose here said that Krang reminded you of who?
Murdoch?
Rose said that Krang reminded her of Melting Man from last week.
Melting Man!
Yeah,
I'm still waiting on that DLC. It's gonna be so great.
He did remind me of Melting Man, I'm not gonna lie.
But yeah, Krang, I mean, granted, like, I have so many memories. I remember going back and I remember playing the Ninja Turtle games for the NES back in the day and fighting Shredder and Krang on the, that big, I forget what it's called, but the big spherical, mobile base of operation thing they have.
So,
yeah.
So as someone that didn't partake in TMNT, is Krang the big bad, or is
It depends on when in the series you tune into it, really.
Because it seems it seems like Shredder was taking like orders from Krang, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it gets kind of messy. Like, to be fair, I think the Turtles' like arch nemesis is Shredder, but then it gets messy when Krang comes in, and then there's different levels of hierarchy within it, and who's working with who, and et cetera, et cetera.
So is it sort of like the parallel between like what do you call it, like Lex Luthor and the Joker?
That's kind of where I was going with it, where Shredder's still always going to be his own villain and always hate the Turtles, but he also works with Krang.
Yeah.
So, we got to see a lot of staples of the series. The only one we didn't get to see was Casey Jones, but but we did get to see April. Now, I always remembered in my head April O'Neil being a strong female character, but in this episode, whoa, did she play off as very just stereotypical female, right?
Yeah, no, that's something out that I also noticed, because like I remember her being like seen as a very strong female role model.
Right, because that would always be my thing, because I would always argue like April O'Neil is like yes, she's literally at her base, she's just a person. She's just a reporter. She has no powers. And yet, when I would play like Turtles games as a kid, or like things that I've seen evolve over time, I see April O'Neil get selected as like, you can select April a lot of times as a playable character and have her fight. And I'm like, that's cool as hell. And that's always what I imagined with her, would be more of this strong female character. And so when I get into the characters, when we get into characterizations like what we saw in this episode, where it seemed like she was more on the sidelines and all she really seemed to serve to do was do, I think, 2 news reports and drive around Splinter.
Those poor turtles, less than 6 inches high.
We interrupt this commercial to bring you a special bulletin.
Interrupt a commercial? It must be big news.
Yep.
And it was like, I know it's only 1 episode of the whole thing, but it was it felt lacking. Her character felt lacking.
Yeah, no, I get it. I was like, at the end of the episode, I was just kind of like taken aback. I was like, why did Splinter even call her? He could have done this on his own.
Maybe he can't drive.
Oh yeah, he doesn't have his driver's license. Especially like I wouldn't want to drive.
I mean,
in New York City either. So
the last time I saw a anthropomorphic rat driving down the street, you know what I did? Honestly, overall, like, my overall impression is it doesn't hold up as well as I remember it, unfortunately, but a lot of pieces do, I think. James Avery as Shredder, that just sticks in my mind, you know? That Shredder and the Shredder from the initial movies from the early 90s. You know, those are my Shredders in my head. No offense to anybody who's played the role since, there's been plenty, but that's like the establishing voices, right?
Oh, the live I cannot remember for the life of me who played the live action Shredder from the 90s, but damn, he did a good job.
Oh yeah, no, that was an amazing performance, honestly. But yes, overall though, like I said, I still enjoyed it. I think the overall episode was interesting. The plot of it was interesting. The Shredder hiding in the bushes the way he was was like so silly, right?
Oh, there was also the point that they were like, we've got a heat-seeking thing that can target the turtles, and I'm like, aren't turtles cold-blooded?
They
That
are.
wouldn't
They are.
work.
I don't know, like, because that's a good question. So, hey, you can debate about this in the comment section, because I am very curious to see what people think. Are anthropomorphic turtles, when you anthropomorphize a turtle, is it still cold-blooded? Or does whatever process, and in this case, the ooze and the mutagenics, does that change them from cold-blooded to warm-blooded? Sound off in the comments. But yes, so we've talked about Garfield, we've talked about turtles. Let's talk about some commercials, shall we? So, the first commercial we got, and I'm surprised here. This is the first time I feel we've gotten a couple little cars. Like, we had a Micro Machines before, and we had the Slammers before. This is the first time I think we've had a commercial for remote control cars.
And look at my turbo racer, run for cover. Doing my high-speed turbo Lamborghini corner, I'm out of sight in no time.
It was not only just remote control cars, it was remote control cars that you could only purchase at Radio
Shack. Yes. Oh my gosh. That was just like the when Radio Shack flashed across the screen, it just like the weird nostalgia. And here's the crazy thing. I never even shopped at Radio Shack that much. And when I did, like, it was always weird and not quite the stuff I needed. A lot of times it was overpriced. And then all these years later, like, I look back on Radio Shack with such fondness. Isn't that weird how nostalgia works like that?
Yes, I am. Can I talk about deep memory?
Yeah.
So, going back to like RC cards, I remember begging my mom for what was it? It was a car called the Dragonfly. I don't know if either of you two remember that one or the commercials for it, where it was an RC car that was like, it was long, like a drag racing car, but it had like wheels that were like an X on it, so it could like flip and like do rolls and stuff. It's crazy. So like you could never flip it over.
Oh wait, yes!
Yeah.
Yes, now, okay. Now I got it.
I got it for Christmas, played with it for like 30 minutes, and then it ran out of juice, and then I never played with it again.
You know you could charge it, right?
It's the nature of, I think, kids, especially with toys like that, where it's like they play with it for 30 minutes and they just forget it exists.
I remember feeling guilty at one point because I realized, like, my parents bought me a bunch of Power Rangers toys for Christmas the one year, and then, like, at some point I was still a kid. I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I wanted these so bad, and then I barely played with them. And I kind of felt guilty about it, even as a kid.
I feel bad about it as an adult, but
I kept a lot of guilt and shame. That's the depression thing as a kid, you know? Other commercials that stuck out?
There was... Where's Tony the Tiger?
My vitamin pack Frosted Flakes, they bring out the tiger in you.
Good, you'll need it.
Frosted Flakes, good. They're great.
Tony the Tiger, yes. Although that one actually was kind of... I thought that was a pretty decent commercial. For all things considered.
His design was interesting. He wasn't big buff.
Yeah, but he wasn't... Like, he was still very much Tony, though. But he wasn't as buff as I've seen him. I think he got... He got a daddy treatment at some point. I don't know how... Like, it's the right term! I'm sorry! It's just...
I mean, yeah.
He is a daddy! Like, but he... Not in every representation. I'm sorry. I know I'm channeling my Karina Drawfee right now with this, but I'm not the only one.
I mean, they had to essentially pull the Twitter because everyone was so thirsty for him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. Another commercial that really stuck out to me was the Burger King Play-Doh collab.
Yeah.
A Whopper, a shake, you can make what Burger King makes.
And here's the thing, and I think, were we all on the same page here with this? That I did not remember there being a Burger King set like this, but I remember a McDonald's one.
Yes.
That I remember distinctly. And this one I got excited about. As soon as I saw what it was and then putting it together, Like, it's weird, because maybe there's a weird, deep memory of this maybe having existed, but it's not strong like the McDonald's one was.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I remember as a kid seeing that thing about putting the parts of a burger together like they did in that commercial.
Honestly, I think it depends on whatever fast food chain that your parents brought you to. So, like, for me, I was mostly a McDonald's kid, but I'm pretty sure there was Burger King and there was also a Wendy's one.
Well, and that's also geographical, too. It's a matter of what was close to you at the time, because, like, I am 40, and I have never been to a Jack in the Box. You know?
Me neither.
I've never been to a Del Taco. There's
Love
all
Del
these
Taco.
ones that I've never been to. I finally got to Whataburger in 2022. I insisted. So, all in all here, like I said at the beginning of this recording, 4 or 5 I would have been. You know, I was very young. So this was the media that was influencing me as a child to get me to who I am today. And now, obviously, everybody can have their own take on who this person is right now. But this is literally stuff that helped mold me. So, in some ways, it's interesting because, like, I look back on some of this and I see some of the tropiness or this or that seems to disconnect now. But as a child being introduced to it, not knowing that these are tropes at times, I think I, growing up, looked at things in terms of, like, I think I was smart enough to be able to pick out, like, that this are all speaking to pieces of what makes us whole. You know? And that's what I really kind of get from it, is that looking back on it now, I think I don't have much negative to say overall. I mean, I'm a little biased. There are things that I wish were a little different looking back on it, but I can't really say, like, I don't, the Turtles episode we watched, was it as great as I remember Turtles being when I was a kid? No. Does that mean I think it was bad? Also, no, I still enjoyed watching it. It's just that, like, it's that stuff where I'm like, oh, but I remember April as being tougher than that, and I remember, you know, these voices being a little different or a little stronger, but maybe it's the thing of when you're 5, you have a different perspective on that. Because now I'm 40, and I have 35 years in between of experiencing different voices and perspectives. So that kind of helps explain why it does feel a little different. And also the fact that it has been that long since I watched it. It's not like I kept watching it this whole time. Because that'll definitely influence it too. Having that break in between that allows your brain to almost kind of reset on some ways. You know? Or it just grabs at the best parts of it that you wanted to keep in there. Sometimes it'll grab at the worst. I'm not saying it's a rule of thumb. Your brain does weird, funky stuff. But our viewing experience, I think, you know, was good. You know, not perfect. But I don't think we can expect perfection on any of these shows that we watch here. You know, we're always going to have something. We're always growing. And I think some of the things here on the series, when we watch these shows that were so popular once upon a time, you know, yeah, they're not perfect, but it's like, it almost feels like the more we look on this show, and a term we used in the last one was like a stepping stone, you know, like a building block of, like, we're starting to find, like, okay, these shows are good, but they don't have it all yet. And it's like building the pieces where it feels like finally we got it, right? Yeah. But any last words from either of you before we wrap up here?
I think so.
I think that's it for me.
All right. Well, I do want to thank you all at home for watching. I want to thank Nova Rose for joining us again. And the wonderful Gajinka.
Thank you.
And as always, remember to keep friendship magic out there. Take care, everybody.
Bye.